I've used Craigslist quite a lot in the past, mostly for buying and selling items like furniture, electronics, and clothes. However, as a woman, I've always been extra careful while using it, even though I've been fortunate not to have any major problems so far. Aside from a couple of unsettling interactions with strange buyers, my experiences have been relatively smooth. I also enjoy browsing the missed connections section sometimes. It's where people post about fleeting encounters they wish could have turned into more. On good days, the posts can be quite entertaining and even humorous. One day, while scrolling through that section, I stumbled upon a post titled "Hello." It read something like, "You should really pay more attention when people watch you. Ignoring someone can hurt their feelings. You're blonde, petite, and I enjoy watching you pick out your groceries." It caught my attention because I happen to be blonde and petite, and I had been grocery shopping just the day before. Despite the eerie coincidence, I brushed it off and kept browsing, trying to shake the weird feeling it gave me. A week later, I was back at the same grocery store, focused on my usual routine. The store was quiet, and with everyone wearing masks these days, it felt easy to blend into the background. I wasn't even thinking about that post anymore. It had completely slipped my mind. But as I was shopping in the produce aisle, I suddenly felt a strong sense of being watched. You know that unmistakable feeling when someone's eyes are on you. I glanced up and saw a man staring at me from the other end of the aisle. His gaze was so intense it sent chills down my spine. Trying not to panic, I looked away and continued shopping. But something about him felt off. He was short, overweight, middle-aged, and wore a mask like everyone else, but his eyes carried a coldness that made me uneasy. I quickly grabbed the rest of my groceries, barely paying attention to what I was putting in my cart, and hurried to the checkout. As I walked to my car in the parking lot, I noticed him again. This time, he was following me. My pace quickened, and I could feel my heart racing. Once I got into my car, I locked the doors and started to drive off. But as I left, I saw him standing there, staring after me. The encounter left me shaken, but I convinced myself it was just an isolated incident. That night, out of boredom, I found myself browsing the missed connections page again. That's when I saw another post titled "Nice Seeing You." It read, "I love watching you at the grocery store, but it was rude of you to run away in the parking lot. I just want you to love me." My stomach dropped. It wasn't a coincidence. The man I had seen at the store, the one who followed me, had written that post. Terrified, I replied to the post, demanding he leave me alone and threatening to call the police. His response made my blood run cold. He wrote, "I was waiting for you to reply. Now we can finally be together." I immediately flagged the post and reported it, but that night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I got an email notification. It was from him. Attached was a photo of me in my kitchen, wearing the clothes I had on at that very moment. My heart stopped. He was outside my house. Then, I heard a knock at my living room window, followed by his voice, "Let me in. We can finally be together." Panicked, I locked myself in the bathroom and called 911. I was barely able to explain what was happening because I was shaking so badly. As I spoke to the operator, I heard the sound of glass shattering downstairs. My blood ran cold. He was inside my house. I stayed as quiet as possible, clutching my phone, listening for any sound. Then I heard him pounding on the bathroom door, shouting for me to open it. Tears streamed down my face as I begged the police to hurry. Finally, I heard sirens. The banging stopped, and I heard him run. The police arrived moments later, but by then, he was gone. I told them everything, about the posts, the grocery store, and the events of that night. They assured me they'd investigate, but for now, I've decided to move to a new place. The fear hasn't left me, and I still worry about seeing him again. One thing's for certain, I'll never visit the missed connections page again. This happened about 4 years ago, right after I turned 18. I can't share the exact location or name of the store, but it's in a busy mall. Working there meant interacting with a lot of different people every day. That day, I was scheduled to open the store, so I arrived early to get everything ready. My usual routine included unlocking the doors, turning on the lights, and tidying up to make sure the store looked presentable. Once everything was set, I sat behind the counter to check and respond to emails from the night before. At first, it seemed like an ordinary morning. My shift that day was a short one since it was a part-time job. I worked for about 4 hours, assisting customers, helping them find what they needed, and ringing up their purchases. Nothing stood out as unusual, and once I finished my shift, I headed to my college classes like I always did. It seemed like just another day, until something happened a few days later that I'll never forget. While out at a restaurant with my boyfriend, my phone started buzzing with non-stop notifications. My work group chat was blowing up because one of the girls had shared a screenshot of a Craigslist post. It was from the missed connections section, where people post about someone they met but didn't get a chance to connect with. The post described a man's encounter with someone who worked at our store, and that someone was me. In the post, he described how I'd helped him find a few items for his daughter and rung up his purchases at the register. He mentioned how polite and friendly I'd been and that he wanted to see me again. Reading it, I realized I remembered the interaction clearly. At the time, nothing about it seemed strange. He had appeared to be just another customer, and I hadn't thought twice about it after he left. Seeing that post, though, made me realize it must have meant something more to him. That realization caught me completely off guard. Sitting in the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about my shift from that day. I tried to recall the men I'd helped and figure out who it might have been. For the next several weeks, I felt uneasy at work. I was extra cautious, always aware of my surroundings. Being 18 and new to the workforce, I wasn't used to people staring at me, or worse, following me. The experience shook me up and changed how I approached my job. I stopped wearing a name tag so customers wouldn't know my name, and I made sure my coworkers understood not to share my work schedule with anyone, no matter what. It taught me a hard but valuable lesson about being cautious, even in what should feel like a safe, everyday environment. Even now, I find myself staying alert and watching for anything that seems out of place. It's better to be safe than sorry. Before cell phones became widespread, I was a mother in my early 30s with 2 young children, aged 1 and 3. One day, I drove them to their pediatrician's office, which was about an hour away from our home in a quiet, newly developed part of Mont, Georgia. The doctor's new building was modern but isolated, and we were thankful for the convenience of getting the last 2 appointments of the day to minimize the trip. I parked our black Jeep Cherokee, which we'd had for 2 years, in a nearly empty parking lot. There were just a handful of cars when we arrived, but by the time our appointment was done and I was strapping the kids back into their car seats, our vehicle was the only one left. The receptionist locked the office doors as we prepared to leave. When I tried to start the car, it wouldn't turn on, it only made a strange clicking sound. Frustrated, I unbuckled the kids, knocked on the office door, and asked to use their phone to call for help. The man from the garage said he could come out, but it might take a while. I gave him the address and went back to the Jeep to wait. I rolled down the windows for ventilation and kept the kids occupied with snacks while we waited. Before long, I saw the lights in the building turn off as the staff left for the day. Soon, we were alone in the parking lot. To my relief, a pickup truck pulled in sooner than expected. A middle-aged man stepped out, greeted me with a nod, and said he'd take a look under the hood. He seemed a little scruffy, which wasn't unusual for someone who works at a garage. He got to work right away, so I sat in the driver's seat with the door open, waiting for instructions to try starting the car. Oddly, He spent a long time fiddling with the engine and mentioned more than once that the problem was just a loose wire, not the battery. He asked me to come look so he could show me the issue, but I stayed seated, telling him I wouldn't understand what I was looking at anyway. I felt it was safer to stay near the kids. His tone grew slightly frustrated as he asked again, but I tried to keep the conversation polite to avoid upsetting him, especially since the sun was starting to set. Then, something unexpected happened. Another truck pulled into the lot. As soon as it arrived, the man working on my car slammed the hood shut, sprinted to his truck, and drove off without a word. I was startled and uneasy, unsure why he left so abruptly. The driver of the second truck got out and introduced himself. His name and voice matched the man I'd spoken to on the phone earlier. He called me by name, apologized for being late, and asked who the other man was. Confused, I told him I thought the first man was him. We both laughed nervously before he got to work with jumper cables, quickly getting my Jeep running again. As he worked, he suddenly came to the driver's side, holding something strange, a long, thin tool that looked like a cross between a dagger and surgical shears. It had sharp blades and small loops for fingers. He said he'd found it under the hood of my car. When I said I'd never seen it before, he looked visibly unsettled and muttered something about it looking freshly sharpened despite its rusty appearance. After paying him, I thanked him and prepared to leave, but his parting words stuck with me. "Ma'am, I don't know what was about to happen here, but I'm really glad I showed up when I did." He suggested I call the police when I got home. Once I had the kids safely inside, I called the police and described what had happened. The officer listened politely but seemed disinterested. When I offered to bring the tool in for them to examine, he declined, saying it sounded like surgical shears based on my description. He advised me to hold on to it for a few days in case they needed to follow up, but no one ever did. I wrapped the shears in newspaper and stored them in a brick storage shed behind our house, where they stayed for years. When we eventually moved to another state, I decided not to bring them with us. They were unsettling, and I didn't want the memory to follow me. I finally threw them away.